sing for me tonight. I spent the last week running from the heat, but the beat beats coming alive. Let's get lost tonight. Lord, who's on my right?
Hello, wackos. Welcome to another episode of Without a Country. I am Corinne Fisher. We are doing a pre-tape today because it is Thanksgiving week. More importantly than that, though, it's Alfred's birthday week, everybody. That's why I'm wearing this shirt that my mom got me. Happy birthday, Alfred, best boy, Sagittarius King. Welcome to the show. We have an action-packed show today. Later on, we have an interview with Chris FAGA, who is a comedian, but does a lot of political work and kind of is a amateur pundit like myself, who just put out a comedy special called Burn After Saying, that has 90% political content. But let's get right into our enemy of the state this week. Enemy of the state this week is no one. Thanksgiving edition, guys. It's Thanksgiving edition. I am not doing an enemy of the state this week. I hate, so many people. I have so much hate in my heart for so many people. And so many institutions and so many ideas. But I said, you know what? We're going to push that all aside. And we're not going to do an enemy of the state for Thanksgiving because that is not the vibe. So in lieu of an enemy of the state, Free Press does this thing where they share old speeches. I think I've shared one of them on the show with you guys before. But this week they shared a speech that Lyndon B. Johnson gave on November 28th, 1963. JFK had just been assassinated and they had just laid him to rest. And he had to address the nation and really rebuild so much, not even trust, but just like rebuild the spirit of the nation. And I think that we're at a similar time right now, which is obviously why Free Press shared this speech. But I wanted to share this with you all because I know a lot of people kind of feel hopeless. Tonight, on this Thanksgiving, I come before you to ask your help, to ask your strength, to ask your prayers, that God may guard this republic and guide my every labor. He added, all of us have lived through 7 days that none of us will ever forget. We are not given the divine wisdom to answer why this has been, but we are given the human duty of determining what is to be for America, for the world, for the cause we lead, for all the hopes that live in our hearts. A great leader is dead. A great nation must move on. Johnson was already thinking, not surprisingly, about the many things he wanted to accomplish, starting with the stalled Civil Rights Act. Kennedy had introduced the bill over the summer, but it had been filibustered in the Senate. Now the new president grasped was the moment to forge ahead with this bill that he hoped would lead America out of the Jim Crow era and establish a new equality. But before he could do that, Johnson had to bring everyone together. He had to establish a rapport with the nation. He had to make Americans feel that he was their president and they were moving forward together. And I think this could be really applied to maybe perhaps some mistakes that Kamala made in running for president, that it didn't feel enough like a new president, and it still felt like an extension of Joe Biden. And I think Lyndon B. Johnson recognized that, especially unlike Biden, with someone like JFK, who was just absolutely beloved by the nation. Yesterday is not ours to recover, Johnson said, but tomorrow is ours to win or to lose. I am resolved that we shall win the tomorrows before us. So I ask you to join me in that resolve, determined that from this midnight of tragedy, we shall move forward in a new American greatness. Then he reminded Americans that despite the tragedy of Kennedy's assassination, more than any generation before us, we have cause to be thankful. So thankful. America, Johnson noted, was prosperous and safe and secure. The goodwill of the world pours out for us, he said. But he was not blind to the manifold dangers ahead. He seemed to worry most of all, reasonably enough, about the nation tearing itself apart. Remember, we learn from history. Kennedy had been loved by millions of Americans, irrespective of their political bent. He had about him an almost mythological quality. The puncturing of that mythology had dealt an incredible blow to the nation's psyche. At that moment, on that Thanksgiving evening in 1963, it seemed unsure of itself or what might come next. In each administration, the greatest burden that the president had to bear had been the burden of his own countrymen's unthinking and unreasoning hate and division, Johnson said, observing that he had worked closely with 5 presidents, Democrats and Republicans, and considered them all friends. That might have been a bit of a stretch, but it was what the nation needed to hear. So, in these days, he went on, the fate of this office is the fate of us all. I really love that. The fate of this office is the fate of us all. I would ask all Americans on this day of prayer and reverence to think on these things. It should be noted that a little more than 7 months later, on July 2nd, 1964, Lyndon Johnson rammed through the Civil Rights Act, persuading large bipartisan majorities in both houses of Congress to support him, and ushered in a new era in America. You know? So anything is possible, guys. And everything is possible with my Patreons. So thank you so much to everyone who has subscribed to the Without a Country Patreon. We have some more new people this week. Shout out, as always, to our wonderful dictator, Hannah Pendergrass, who is on her 3rd month of being a dictator. My Capitalist Pigs, Emily Mame, Ryan Beckland, Erin Fejas, Joy Turner, Dylan, Joe P., Nicole Perks, Elle Watson, Holly Clark, Joshua Callahan, Stephanie Anderson, Brandy Otter, Brandon Oglesby, Lauren Manu, Carrie, Caroline Bonner, Erica Backus, Lisa Ashbacher, Barbara Mondragon, Delaney Muncie, Randy Peterson, Tegan, McKenna Hansen, Leah M. Ellers, Laura Lynn Pearson, Christopher Fanguy, Norris Mark, it's one word, one name, Hale Stiers, EMCP333, Camilla Driggs, Jenny Lynn, Carolyn, Katie Robbins, Hannah Ronaldo, Jennifer Daly, Catherine Best, Tim Ackerman, Boo Batsy, Lakin Keene, Lil Floha, Jesse Paygrain, Audra Williams, Crystal Schmidt, Shelby Snyder, Michael Fow, Amber Christensen, Talene Georgian, Lila Lee Soley, Jasmine Grant, Bridget, Luke, Marisa James, Chuggle, Brittany Gustus, Alex Hart, Sierra Mataro, and my cuties, Ivy Espana, Lily, Justin Choi, Tina Nelson, Brianna Middleman, Samantha Johnson, Esther Van Alst, Jasmine Rose, Lauren Natinsky, Jessica Michelle, Laura Wolf, Morgan, Amanda, Elizabeth Snell, Emma Flowers, Emily, Karen Denise, Amir Hassan, Elisa McCall, Long Arms Length, Sophia Tauber, Gemma James, Miranda, Emily Eckelberger, Rebecca _99, Cavs 138, Zoe Ross, Annie Green, Heidi Lundquist, Nicole, Carl Murphy, Margarita Cranova, Beth Brunner, Lauren Moorkill, Chris Gordon, Tori Colster, Desiree Coutinho, Kristen Hood, Sammy Lane, Ms. Mack, Emily LaFontano, and Fright Lab. Now, speaking of my WACOs, let's get right into our WACO mailbag for this week. Again, every week we just get more and more emails. So let's start out with this email from WACO Bobby. They say, "Hi, Corinne. I want to start by acknowledging your unwavering passion and dedication to the well-being and support of women, which has truly been inspiring to witness over the last decade. Thank you for that." I actually meant to cut that part out because we didn't need it, but it was very nice, and I read it and said, "Oh, thank you." I'm writing to bring to your attention today's, and this is from November 21st, House vote on H.R. 9495. The legislation, as summarized by C-SPAN, is described as legislation requiring the IRS to waive tax penalties for American hostages and individuals wrongfully detained abroad, as well as end nonprofit tax-exempt status of groups supporting terrorist organizations. So there's a lot going on right there. While the stated stated intent may seem straightforward, this bill could also enable the president-elect to unilaterally revoke the tax-exempt status of organizations he deems without justification, evidence, or cause to be terrorist organizations. As I write this, the vote is taking place, and I can't help but think about the potential implications for nonprofits like the one I'm part of. Legislation like this, if misused, could jeopardize critical work being done in our communities. Given your insights on the terminology surrounding terrorism and how I always say on this show, terrorism is in the eye of the beholder, and I do stand by that, but obviously if it's in the hands of someone who, maybe we could call it terrorist himself, Donald Trump, it can really be misused, especially when so many nonprofits are going to be necessary to fight back against a lot of legislation I think Donald Trump is going to try to pass. Given your insights on the terminology surrounding terrorism and how its interpretation often favors those in powers, I thought you might be interested in learning more about this bill and its broader implications. I'd be grateful for your thoughts or any resources you might suggest on this matter. And it did end up passing, unfortunately. And so I looked it up, and there's an interesting article by Isaiah Thompson in nonprofitquarterly.org, HR 9495, Bill Threatening Nonprofits Passes House. A bill, H.R. 9495, which would allow a presidentially appointed Treasury Secretary to unilaterally strip a nonprofit of its status if deemed a terrorism-supporting organization, has passed in the U.S. House of Representatives. The bill passed 219 to 184, mostly along partisan lines, with Republicans in support and Democrats opposing. I think especially during this time, most of the nonprofits you're going to see that really need to mobilize are ones that have left-leaning values, right? 15 Democrats broke with their caucus to vote in favor of the bill. The measure, formally named the Stop Terror Financing and Tax Penalties on American Hostages Act, which just goes to show you really got to read what a bill is and not just go by the name. Because the name definitely is usually chosen to help with the bias or the story that the person who proposed the bill wants to sell you. Has raised alarm across the nonprofit sector and U.S. civil society, and a multitude of organizations from civil rights groups to nonprofit media to advocacy and direct service groups have mobilized against the bill. You definitely know that anything that is a nonprofit dedicated to, eliminating media bias and things like that, those are going to be, somehow acknowledged as terrorist organizations because he's going to say that they're, helping spread conspiracy theories, right? So it's like it's a American terrorist. An earlier version of the bill was introduced with bipartisan support amid widespread campus protests over the war in Gaza, with at least the implication that some groups supporting or organizing those protests were also or therefore supporting terrorism. Obviously, we knew it was going there. That assumption alone would be enough to spark fear of political retribution by any president via the Secretary of the Treasury against disfavored nonprofit groups. But the stakes of the bill were raised when Donald J. Trump won re-election this month. Those mobilizing against the measure fear that Trump, who has publicly broadcast his interest and willingness to punish his perceived political opponents, will use the bill to target and silence any organization that he disagrees with. This September, the ACLU and some 150 organizations co-signed a letter opposing the legislation, expressing deep concerns about the bill's potential to grant the executive branch extraordinary power to investigate, harass, and effectively dismantle any nonprofit organization. And just like, even if they aren't able to dismantle it, just like the investigations, if they have to hire lawyers, it's going to drain these nonprofits' funds. And nonprofits are always asking for more money because they just don't have a ton of it. Depending, as long as they're rated well on Charity Navigator and aren't just like paying their the head of the organization money and under the guise of doing something, including new outlets, universities, and civil liberties organizations like ours by stripping them of their tax-exempt status based on a unilateral accusation of wrongdoing. Last week, the Council on Foundations, Independent Sector, National Council of Nonprofits, and United Philanthropy Forum penned another letter stating, this legislation would allow the Secretary of the Treasury to designate Section 501c nonprofits as terrorist-supporting organizations at the Secretary's discretion without requiring the Secretary to share their full evidence or reasoning with accused nonprofits. Furthermore, the legislation runs counter to constitutional due process protections by placing the burden of proof on the accused organization and providing only 90 days for organizations to demonstrate their innocence before revoking their tax-exempt status. A lot of these places also don't have that many people working for them. So if a smaller nonprofit is attacked, 90 days to prove their innocence is like one person going through all the paperwork for the entire nonprofit. The bill failed an earlier House vote last week when supporters failed to rally a 2/3 vote, required for procedural reasons, with 52 Democrats breaking with their caucus to vote in favor. The House vote today, however, required only a simple majority to pass. Speaking on the House floor Thursday, Democrat opponents of the bill warned that it could be weaponized by Trump and his administration to target political enemies and perceived opposition to the incoming president's agenda. Again, these bills, the language has to be very, very crisp, so it cannot be misused. Describing the bill as a death penalty for nonprofits, Representative Lloyd Doggett, Democrat from Texas, said that rather than protecting Americans, the measure would allow President-elect Donald Trump to use it as a sword against those he views as political enemies. If this bill were to become law, we would hand him a bludgeon for a crusade against those he deems the greatest danger to America, what he calls the enemy within. It is not just Trump imposing a death sentence that should concern us, but it is his power to intimidate, said Doggett. Clearly, the bill would have a chilling effect on any group that has the audacity to challenge his chilling vision. Representative Pramila Jayapal, Democrat from Washington, who chairs the Democratic Progressive Caucus, called the bill an authoritarian play by Republicans to expand the sweeping powers of the executive branch to go after political enemies and stifle political dissent. Representative Rashida Tlaib, Democrat from Michigan, called the measure a dangerous and unconstitutional bill that would allow unchecked power to target nonprofit organizations as political enemies and shut them down without due process. Republican members dismissed such objections, noting previous bipartisan support for the bill. House Ways and Means Chair Jason Smith, Republican from Missouri, blasted his colleagues across the aisle for voting against the measure. Despite that consistent bipartisan support, Smith said, the majority of our Democrat colleagues voted last week to block passage of this bill. Why? Because President Trump won the election. Yeah, but I mean, I think I don't think they necessarily would have voted that way if any Republican won the election. Doesn't that say something, that this guy is so fucking untrustworthy that they worry that nonprofits who are, protecting freedom of speech or the right to peacefully protest or God knows what else, in the LGBTQ space or the women's space, that they don't trust that he's not going to somehow make it so that these things are deemed terrorist organizations. And it's certainly possible, right? Especially because I think they could make the argument that so many, straight white men who have been school shooters or just mass shooters in general, the Democrats have really been fighting for those people to be called terrorists, and the right wing media certainly never they don't call them terrorists. So I think that's kind of like the argument that the Republicans could make against the Democrats. It's like, well, you say these people are terrorists, so we say your people are terrorists. It's very childish, really. They now believe the authorities in this bill might be abused, said Smith, but every concern raised by Democrats has been addressed in this bill to ensure due process and to protect legitimate nonprofits. The bill now advances from the Republican-controlled House to the Senate, where its fate is uncertain, but where it is very well may be defeated by Democratic senators who still hold a slim majority. Regardless, groups following the legislation warn that the bill is likely to return at least in some form in 2025 under a Republican-controlled Congress and President Donald Trump. So we'll see what happens, in the Senate. But yeah, it did pass the House, which is not great. And the Senate, as the author noted, is Republican. All right. So thank you so much, Bobby, for bringing that to our attention. I also heard from a lot of teachers this week, specifically WACO's Katie and Michelle. This is a message from Katie, even though both Katie and Michelle did write me. Hi, Corinne, longtime fucker and WACO here. I appreciated the dialogue last week regarding the Department of Education and would like to add a bit to that. I am a school social worker for students in a very low income area, most of which are people of color. This is what is called a Title I school due to the economic makeup of the students. Many of my students lack access to basic needs, and school is their safe haven. A large portion of my job is working with students who have disabilities and are part of the special education system. Myself and a majority of my colleagues and students' parents are very concerned about Trump's plan for education. While we would all agree that the education system needs an overhaul, less funding, and more power to the states is not the answer. The Department of Education is tasked with federal oversight of discrimination and equal access to education for all. This includes extra funding for schools like mine, where we use that money to pay retired teachers to come work in small academic groups or to buy things like curriculum or Chromebooks. While it is not a huge portion of funding for all schools, it is money that absolutely matters for the Title I schools. While my state is blue and my governor has openly vowed to fight back against any detrimental Trump actions, I worry most about children in red states. What happens when they decide the special education students are too expensive to teach with too little economic payoff when they grow into adults? Great point here. What happens when they decide, or what happens when the Republicans go back to the Bible and they start talking about the part of the Bible where they basically say that you should kind of, dismiss anyone who's or off anyone who's like in a wheelchair bound? What happens when they decide low income areas should not get extra funding to make up for lack of property taxes, and we go back to segregation with poor students and students of color being educated in underfunded schools? What happens when states and when she says segregation, she doesn't mean segregation in the way that it's like, legally mandated that black and white people are educated separately. She's talking about segregation, as I see it, like financial segregation and tactics that the government has used before, that it's like they're not explicitly stating that white and black students are separated, but often students of color are segregated just because of how the schooling system is set up, and that they all are kind of dispersed to these underfunded schools because the government, knows, this is an area where mostly poor people and students of color are being educated. What happens when states like Oklahoma, ranked 49th in education, decide to spend their money on Trump Bibles and teach Christianity? Yeah, what happens? Do all those children deserve less access to quality education just because they happen to be born in a certain state? They certainly do not. There are federal protections for a reason. I personally fear that Trump's plan is to destroy public education, pushing us into a fully privatized system to line the pockets of the wealthy at the expenses of our most vulnerable students. And I definitely would look into, we even already saw the article, whether it be last week or a couple weeks ago, about privatized prison systems rejoicing when Trump won the election. So I think we should really keep our eyes on anything that is privatized and anything that makes rich people richer, which is most things in this country. Private schools are not required to admit special education students. It goes without being said that they can teach whatever they want, and their staff and teachers are often very underqualified unless the school is incredibly expensive. We often have parents return from private schooling with their kids far behind the state mandate. This will only widen the gap between rich and poor students. This is not even touching on homeschooling parents who in my state do not need to register or prove what they are teaching, and I see parents pull their students to homeschool with malicious intent every single year. I mean, if you homeschool your child, I would actually love to hear from you, but I mean, it's kind of like a running joke, certainly among comedians, that anyone who's homeschooled, like, not only do they not have the level of education that even kids in public school have, but they're also weird because they haven't been properly socialized. Remember, school is not just to, learn math and, reading and science and social studies. It's also to have you train to be around other people than your immediate family so you know how to be a fucking person in the world. All right. And no place does that as well as public school, because you're with a variety of people, whether it be not a lot of times your fiscal status is rather similar if you're in a public school because of how public school is organized, but you're certainly around people of other religions and other ethnicities, and I can't imagine how much more different I would be if I had not gone to public school and been exposed to so many different types of people. I am all for many of the things you and Mike discussed, although I am unsure of Mike's point about the education system pumping out Amazon workers. Wouldn't a larger focus on work skills and less academics be exactly that? Moving away from higher education and critical thinking will create generations of workers. We need our kids to have access to multiple outcomes: university, community college, trade schools, or other vocational training to have a thriving society. Right? I think you need to be exposed to all these things so that the child can make the decision, this is what I'm interested in. And there certainly are kids who are like, reading's not for me. And I think that's fine to make that decision. And then to say but I really love fixing cars and I am going to go spend my time at a trade school, because I think that person has a really high likelihood of having a thriving business as long as they know how to, keep their books. I appreciate all that you do and your effort with the causes that matter to you, Katie. Thanks so much for writing in. So we have a guest today. Thanks. We're thankful for this guest. We're thankful for everything. Today's guest is comedian Chris FAGA. He just had a comedy special released called Burn After Saying, which you can find on the High Society Radio YouTube page. It's all political content. He also worked for the Democratic Party 3 summers in a row.
Yeah, when I was 18.
Well, there had to be different. You weren't 18 every
20,
summer.
but that was the first year I did it. I'm still a registered Democrat. And yeah, they paid well. I'll be honest, for an 18-year-old kid who was.
Oh, broke. you were like employed. You weren't even just volunteering. I thought you were like volunteering. Oh, fantastic.
Yeah.
All right. So this is today's guest. And you just put out a whole half hour of political content.
Yeah, I'd say 90% of it is. There's a couple of you can't be a dude and release a comedy special without talking about your penis a little bit.
A little bit. Well, I like that because I feel like female comics feel like we can't release a comedy special and not talk about our vaginas a little bit. So it's nice that this is a shared plight that we both have. But you're here to talk to us about a couple things today. I think primarily before the show we talked about the right drift.
Like media, like dudes becoming. Ending. I've done an interview with there's a guy, Martin Rook from Harvard, who reached out to me because I was talking about this on the show, where I think left-wing media bias leads to more extreme right-wing views, particularly in men, because men seek out deeper recesses of the internet. I think we're just used to it because of porn, honestly, but it's. I think so. There'll be like a kernel of truth in certain things, and you'll kind of go, yeah, but I know this to be true, and then somebody will call you a conspiracy theorist. You know what I mean? Like it's like kind of like
men don't. So I mean, this is like men don't like to be challenged, so then they go even deeper in the other direction.
Well,
that's part of it.
I think that's a big part of it, but I think a lot of times, like when you're watching something, let's say for example, I watched this happen with a bunch of people I know who are right-wing guys who, when the Derek Chauvin video came out, were very much like, that's murder. And then as the videos of protests were coming out, and some of them, obviously a lot of people were on Twitter and Instagram seeing more of the visceral kind of, buildings burning down and stuff like that. And then they're just like, all of a sudden these guys I watched, their opinions go from this is murder to it was a fentanyl overdose. And I'm just like, oh, it's because they watch these things and they keep being told this is like fine. It's like, well, no, like these guys don't think rioting is okay or whatever you want to call it. You can say it was a mostly peaceful protest all you want. It's like if I'm watching a video of somebody getting hit in the face, then it's not like I've seen that video. If I'm watching a video of a small business burning down, I've seen that video. So what ends up happening is these guys go, everybody around me and the television is calling me insane. But I've seen this and I believe my eyes. And so then they find somebody who goes, you're not crazy. And then maybe that guy's not so bad, right? Maybe that's, what's that, Brett Baer or somebody like that. One of these like vaguely center-right figures.
Not so extremely conservative.
Yeah, and then eventually there's media biases even there. And, all these major news networks are bought and paid for. Like, why does Lockheed Martin have commercials on CNN? Why does Lockheed Martin need commercials? They're a defense contractor. There's nothing. What are they advertising? So it's like, okay, so you're seeing this, and then you get a little, and then all of a sudden you end up on some Telegram channel where everything is blaming the Jews, and it like, you know what I mean? Like
I've seen it happen.
Yeah, like you had an ex-boyfriend who had this exact thing happen to him. So I have to like kind of just as somebody who kind of tries to be discerning, has to like check myself, even on both sides. Like I see like, obviously like because of some of our mutual friends, you end up in a little bit of a right-wing bubble on social media platforms, right?
Like, well, you might end up in a right-wing
more so. Well, you're not on Twitter at all.
I am. I'm on X.
Are you? I almost never see your tweets.
Yeah, I mean that's because you're probably in the like it's like the following tab, but then it always goes like the For You tab, and it's always showing me people that I'm not even following anymore. So I don't see any of my friends either.
So yeah, like I'll have to because like I'm a New York guy, so I still have friends I grew up with.
Yeah.
Like I like when I see something that I'm like a lot of like right-wing guys I know from the internet are like being like, look at these babies complaining about this. And I'll reach out to my buddy who literally had a land acknowledgement at his wedding and be like, hey, are woke people talking about this? And he'll be like, this is the first time hearing about whatever it is you're fucking talking about. And I'm like, okay, this is not an actual problem. But like, because we all get stuck in these bubbles, it ends up, because those guys have all seen that video. It's just not an actual thing that the bulk of these people on the left or on the far left are talking about. But you think it is because you're now stuck in this thing, and then you keep drifting further and further right. Am I making the point?
Yeah, well, just the same as there's blind spots in actual media, there's blind spots in our daily lives. Like for me, a blind spot for me with the 2024 election was, I had gone to the Trump rally for the Daily Show special.
Oh, yeah.
I had talked to people, and to me, it seemed like the main concerns of people who were going to vote for Donald Trump were immigration and finances, right? Those were the two main things we heard. And then you heard a little bit of rumblings about, trans people and trans people using, being in women's spaces. It's mostly trans women being in cis women's spaces. That seems to usually be the talking point. And I just felt that wasn't as big of an issue that was actually affecting people's votes. But then after the election, when Donald Trump was announced the winner and people kind of really felt comfortable like showing themselves online as MAGA supporters who hadn't before, so many people from like my high school started, saying like, yeah, I just want my, people say that if you cared about your kids and your daughters, you would have voted for, if you specifically cared about your daughters, you would have voted for Kamala. But I do care about my daughters and I want them to be able to play sports fairly and use the bathroom safely. And I'm like, holy shit, like this trans issue in quotes is not in quotes. It's actually a huge issue. And that was a blind spot for me. I just didn't believe, I guess I was like, I couldn't fathom it actually affecting your vote, but it seemingly has.
Everybody talks about it. I think it's like one factor. I think the main factors were the economy and immigration, but I think this is also a thing. Social issues do move the needle a little bit. Like,
For
you know what I mean? Like,
sure.
if you're on the fence, because like really, like you don't know the difference between a Biden presidency and a Trump presidency really in your finance, unless you have like a large 401k and you can actually see some sort of movement. Like,
Sometimes in taxes you did. Trump kind of historically hates actually entertainers. So people think, if you have a lot of money, you're doing well, but that's not true for people in the entertainment business.
I can believe that. Yeah, I mean, he got rid of a lot of individual write-offs, which a lot of people in entertainment utilize. You know, what I mean? You can write off your computer, you can write off your desk in your apartment. You know what I mean? Like any sort
Right,
of thing.
because especially when you work for yourself as an entertainer, kind of like always, you're always working, but obviously you're not trying to like write off everything.
Yeah, but So what I'm saying is, like, I think that was a thing, but I think it was also just made more provocative by literally every, both right and left-wing news outlets talking about this. I think the average person in middle America, there's a good chance they've never met a trans person except for, like, maybe the kid who is, like, awkward in the high school who goes by they, them pronouns but has no inkling of getting any sort of like gender affirming surgery.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Or they met someone who kind of just starts dressing it, a guy who starts dressing in women's clothing, but doesn't have the resources and funding to actually get the gender affirming surgery.
Or necessarily even wants
Right.
to. Like, how many people actually, I mean, like, isn't it from my understanding, it's a small percentage of people that actually even, and look, it's very easy to get, we're doing it. We're getting bogged down in this conversation, which is not what we set out to talk about, because it is like, it's an interesting conversation.
It's interesting, and it's also much easier to grasp than talking about finances. Like, if you talk to, everyone just like likes to say like the economy is bad, but if you actually sit down and have someone, and I can't do it myself, like if you ask someone to explain the economy to you, I have really yet to have anyone properly explain the economy in full to me who is not doing it for a living. So that's why it's funny. Like, you can look at your bank account and then basically that's it. And you look at the prices of gas and you look at the prices of groceries and then that's your study in economy.
I mean, for the average person, they go, okay, how are my, what is it? 50% of people own some sort of stocks, right, in the country. So you go, or 50% of adults. So you go, okay, like my portfolio looks okay, so that's good. But then at the same time, my actual paycheck is going less far because the price of eggs is double. You know what I mean? Which is why, like, I'm kind of like, I think it's crazy that some of these Trump people are just like for these blanket tariffs, which is, it's just it's like there's a reason why we don't have a universal sales tax, because the middle class has to spend a significantly larger percentage of their earnings on necessities. That's why you have an income tax. Like, the only way a tariff works is if you eliminate income tax for like the bottom 50% of the country. So it's like it becomes economics is the amount of factors that go into like how you retire and when you can retire and what, like, so like all the macroeconomic indices like seem to be like the stock market's doing great.
Right.
Certain things are looking better. Prices have fallen a bit since COVID. But what a lot of people don't take into account is the average person wasn't spending as much money during COVID. They were home. There was no, like, people only kind of know what they feel. Like, there's a great book, one of the deans from Princeton wrote, it's called Democracy for Realists. And they kind of just talk about, like, it's the last 6 months before an election can kind of sway an election on economic terms. So if a lot of people in the last couple of quarters were just thinking to themselves, I mean, when Trump was president, my life was a little bit better, and maybe it is because they didn't have to commute to work. Even if gas prices were higher, you weren't driving there.
Like, they were spending more time with their family, and they can credit that to Donald Trump, like, cares about families. And it's like, no, you had to be with your family because you were locked indoors.
Yeah, but people don't.
I love that. I love that notion of people are kind of viewing the government based on how they feel, because, coming from the other world I come from, relationship expert, I think so many things that we learn from relationships are applicable to the government. And the number one gripe that I have with men is when you ask, and there's many, when you ask a boyfriend or a husband what they like most about their female partner, their response will be, I like how she makes me feel. Right. And so that's not giving credit for any of the accomplishments she's done, any of her actual qualities. It's like reactive. Right. So it's very interesting that you and I believe it to be so, that's how people, but it's also like, it doesn't, actually give us any information on how the government is doing. Just like that explanation of doesn't give us any qualities about the woman.
That is completely fair.
It's the same exact thing, basically. I just think it's easier because, well, not everyone has been a politician, but basically everyone has been in a romantic relationship, even if it was short term. So I feel like it makes it easier for people to understand. And like at the base, we are still human. So our reactions to things, whether they're happening in our house or in our world, are usually the same. They're usually aligned.
Yeah, I think the average person is more emotional, and particularly the average man is significantly more emotional than they like to admit, just in general.
Oh, we knew.
Yeah. I'm sure women.
We figured it out. You guys just you kind of react usually using anger, where we'll go to sadness first.
I mean, I use drinking, but that's me.
That's masking, though. Plenty of women mask as well.
That's true. I mean, I don't have any makeup. That's the basic masking for a woman, right? I can cover up my sadness by putting this on.
So, can I ask you? I think who did you end up voting for?
I wrote in Cornel West.
Oh, okay.
Which also, I'll be honest, in that voting booth, and this is a big part of it too. So, all right, so I'm an uneducated white male, right?
Right.
Who grew up pretty poor in New York City.
Do you have a college degree?
No.
Okay.
I didn't go to college. But so when I have to have this conversation with all my friends who did go to college, who grew up with a little bit more money than me, and I have conversations with them. I'm like, hey, the reason why people are saying that blue collar white guys feel talked down to the Democratic Party is because you guys all think I'm reasonably intelligent, and I feel talked down to by the Democratic for a long time.
Oh, and for sure. And that's something that we talk about a lot on this show, because I do have a college degree. I mean, I come from both my parents have college degrees, which I think is kind of not the norm for someone who came from the financial bracket that I did, which is very middle class. I feel like plenty of middle class people, both parents don't have college degrees. Sure. And so a lot of times, I think because I come from that, people read that I came from more money than I did, and that's not the case at all. But the Democratic Party, I mean, half the time, even with a college degree, I'm constantly looking up words in articles. I have no idea what they're saying. They're using political jargon. And that's what I think the success of Fox News is. They found a way to use basically children's book language to convey things that the average American needs to know. And while I don't always like the way Fox News conducts itself, I do believe that we need a piece of democratic media that speaks to people at a level that they can understand, whether or not they have a college degree.
I think Media Matters is kind of that, isn't it?
Yeah, that's not that's not. We need
it's not as large as
exactly. Okay. We need a huge platform, because to us, when you think New York Times, you think Washington Post. These are the things that you're dealing with, and those articles are regular. Number one, they're long.
Yes.
They're very long, and they have tons of words that I don't understand.
Well, the New York Times you have to read every day. I used to have to read the New York Times in high school, right? I went to Brooklyn Tech. You had to read the New York Times.
Oh, really?
Or you couldn't pass global history.
Oh, that's
you had
really
to have
cool.
a subscription to. They gave it out. You had to pick up your copy of the New York Times at lunch, and you had to follow at least global affairs. And so you have to read the New York Times every day because they reiterate everything every day in national, particularly international stories. They go, hey, just in case you missed yesterday, here's this. So it's you have to read it every day to be able to breeze through the entire thing. If you're reading it once in a while, you're going to be like, wait, what did I miss here?
Right.
So that'll always happen. But kind of what I meant about the talking down to is they did a survey. I don't remember if it was the end of Obama's term or the beginning of Trump's first term, but they did a survey of it was a substantial one about what people believed the definition of racism is. And most people still believed at that point, I don't know what it is now, that the definition of racism is being bigoted towards somebody of another race or thinking they're less than because of their race. But if you talk to a lot of college-educated liberals, what is the definition of is prejudice plus power? Whereas people are using it as kind of a synonym as prejudice. It's a kind of forced semantic drift that leads to a talking down to people who didn't have the same social science classes or humanities classes that a lot of people have. So it's if you have 60% of the population of the country going, that's not the definition of that word, and 40% of the population going, we know better than you. It's kind of like the reason why you say Corinne and I, or I would say that, right, is it's because back when information was very much controlled by there was literally, it's two bishops in England that had a printing press that created the first grammar textbook. I forget their names. But like it's closer to Latin, so that's why they put that context in there. And you could kind of get away with that when there was a bottleneck on information. But with the internet, there's no bottleneck on information. So if I'm watching even a guy like Cornel West, who I respect a lot, who, like I said, I voted for, if I'm watching him on PBS say that this is the definition of racism, I can then go on Facebook and go, this fucking idiot said this. This is the definition of racism. And then it gets 100 likes from people that I know.
Right.
So I go, okay, 100 people that live in my town agree with what I just said. So, all right, I must be on to something. So it's like, but when you keep having this, like, I think that's the first, I've said this before on like my podcast, that's the first stone cast in the modern culture war. Whatever changing the definition of race, and like here's the thing, I've like looked into where that comes from. I like kind of found a lady who taught, but you can never find definitively where.
I'm like, when did this? Yeah, when did this?
It's not long ago,
right?
It's like in our lifetimes, so it's like this is not like an old, and like you can kind of find there was one woman who started saying it, and she has a book where she talks about it, but was never like a very widely circulated book.
Right.
So it kind of started in these academic circles and kind of like got taught to everybody who, and obviously there's more, this generation has more college graduates than in the past. So you're going to see more of a stark divide when it comes to those beliefs.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So it's like, I have a joke in the special where I say like, I never went to college, so I don't really actually know what communism is. So I just had to read Karl Marx's Communist Manifesto.
Sure. Which
is not true. I read it, 20 years ago or something. It's 45 pages. If you're calling yourself a socialist, and you
I have
read
a mini copy
nuts.
of it that was gifted to me. Weird gift.
Yeah, that's a gift.
Yeah, from an ex-boyfriend.
I have it on a bookshelf right next to an InfoWars copy of the Constitution that I have from like 15 years ago.
Oh my goodness!
That somebody handed me on the street, and I was like, I don't even know what this is.
Wow. So I pulled up the definition right now. If you just do definition of racism on Google, and it says prejudice, discrimination, or antagonism by an individual, community, or institution against a person or people on the basis of their membership in a particular racial or ethnic group, typically one that is a minority or marginalized.
So that's kind of a mishmash of both definitions.
Right.
But I mean, so I just think that's kind of like, and then you start seeing that, and like, so whatever. What we're kind of trying to get to with like where people moving like blue collar guys, working class guys moving away from the Democratic Party. I think kind of like really starts with like the first Bush administration, but like through the Clintons, because it's this interesting thing with that. That's the more nuts and bolts stuff, right? So George H.W. Bush started the normalization of trade with China, and then Bill Clinton actually like ushered it in. And so a lot of the stuff, and like I said a few minutes ago, I'm very against these like blanket tariffs, but a lot of the tariffs that Trump wanted to put on Chinese goods in his first term, we were supposed to already have on it. But we like entered these treaties with China, and it's because the Bushes and the Clintons lied to us, right? So, and that destroyed American manufacturing like solidly. And the thing is, when we entered these agreements, we were supposed to tariff any goods that the Chinese government adds a subsidy to.
Okay.
But you can't find Chinese government subsidies. It's a very blurred line between private enterprise and the government in China. And they knew, like, you can always say hindsight is 20/20. They didn't know, but it's like you're telling me, like, all right, I was a child when this happened, but like you're telling me two different presidential administrations could not see that the CCP, like the way they sold it to the American people, they were like, if we let them in, of course they won't do that. They just want to be included in the global situation. But it's like they didn't. They wanted to be a global superpower.
Right.
And they subsidize their industries. And on top of the fact that they don't have labor protections and lower wages, that's even more reason why we can't compete with them. And now everything is made in China. And it's like, that's a big part of it. So you gut the middle class. So there really is no middle class. There's no labor movement to support the left anymore.
Well, so what did George H.W. Bush and Bill Clinton think was going to happen?
They thought that they were going to make their donors very rich, which they did because they got to exploit cheap Chinese labor.
Right.
So that's actually what they think was going to happen.
So
it was short-term gains.
So it's actually not unlike what so many people on the left are accusing, are kind of thinking that Donald Trump is going to do.
Yes.
So it's exactly aligned. So this is when we talk about the left becoming the right. It's kind of everyone is the same, and then it creates this general mistrust in politicians as a group.
Yeah, of course.
So when do you think people really started to understand what was happening, that they were being taken advantage of? I mean, we've heard about the disappearing of the middle class for quite some time now. I think that's been a talking point I've heard since I was in high school.
Well, there's other things too. Obviously the cost of a home is skyrocketed, right?
Right.
But a lot of that has to do. The New York Times actually put out a great piece called "The Death of the American Starter Home" about a year and a half ago, maybe 2 years ago, and they kind of talk about how a lot of that has to do with regulation. But like we were just talking about, the average person doesn't realize that the reason why there's no 2-bedroom ranch-style houses in their town being built they don't realize that it's the government making it too expensive to build that, so people are building 2-family houses and renting them out. What they see is they go, I can't afford a house.
Right.
But my parents could afford a house. But really what your parents did was they bought a small house, and then they paid off some of the equity, and then the value of that house went up, and then they bought a bigger house. That, you know what I mean? That's what past generations did in this country. And you just go, I can't afford a house because these houses don't exist. But then you kind of go, then somebody tells you it's due to regulation, and you go, who do you associate regulation with? You always associate it with Democrats, despite the fact that Republicans pass plenty of nonsensical regulations. You know what I mean? So it's that I think that's a big part of it. I think a lot of it is just I think part of it is this, under Barack Obama, is where I think some of this. So there's a very common thing where they say Barack Obama had no scandals. That's bullshit. Fast and Furious was a huge scandal, and Hillary Clinton's State Department run it's not just Benghazi, the stuff in Libya. It was disastrous. There's a great documentary that PBS put out called Putin's Revenge, and it talks about how she was fucking with Putin when he was having, one of his fake elections in Russia. You know what I mean?
Hillary Clinton was fucking
with
him?
And anybody can go watch it. It's on YouTube. It's free, and it's from PBS. This is not some crazy thing that I watched. But basically, Hillary Clinton's State Department was disseminating propaganda against Vladimir Putin while he was having a sham election. It was a sham election, but it's like that fucking Michael Jordan meme. And then I took that personally. And then what happened in the next election? And then you wanted to blame Donald Trump for it, but it's
he has a vendetta against her because of that.
Exactly.
And that kind of flew over our heads.
Well, yeah. I mean, I think they put it out. That documentary came out once after Donald Trump won the presidency. So, I mean, I saw that and I was like, I didn't know this happened.
Sure.
But you know what I mean? So, but it's but the idea that that's kind of the same thing I'm talking about, where it's you see this thing and you go, well, I'm saying this, but the TV's saying this, and all my friends around me are believing the TV, so I'm here now listening to this guy who's telling me I'm not crazy. I think that kind of started under Obama, where they were the only thing that they got him on is the tan suit. It's well, no, I know people who voted, I know senior citizens who voted for Obama twice, black immigrants, who then voted for Donald Trump, and their main reason was, he said I wouldn't pay more for fucking health insurance, and every dollar that I'm now spending extra on health insurance is money that I can't leave my grandchildren. And that's the kind of, and now those people became fucking right-wing fucking weirdos.
Right. And I think a lot of the talking points you'll hear from the left is that, people who voted for Donald Trump care more about they only think about themselves, not the larger community. And the point that I've been making, and I don't disagree with that notion, but I also think that it's if you don't have money to feed your family, it kind of the conversation kind of stops there, because I do feel being philanthropic is a bit of a luxury, having not only the money but also the time and the energy to think about others does not exist for everyone in a capitalist society. And a lot of Democrats are angry about that, but I'm well, you have time to be angry about it because you have money and time. A lot of people don't have those things. There was certainly time when I didn't have those things.
Yeah, I mean, if you're working, there was a time not even that long ago where I was just picking up a lot of extra work just to kind of do it, and I was waking up at 3 a.m, going to one job, coming back, and doing part of another job, and then still having to do podcast and comedy at night.
Mm-hmm.
And like, I mean, there was a number of Fridays where I worked from 3 a.m. until like noon, went home, had to do other work like just for my home business. Then I had to go host 2 shows at like Brooklyn Comedy Club. And then the next morning I had to wake up for work again the next day.
Right.
So it's like in those situations, if you tell me, hey, did you know that like there's a Skid Row in LA? I'd be like, I'm so tired, I'm gonna die.
Right.
Like, you know what I mean?
Because you're doing, and I mean, I would argue that being able to chase your dreams is also a luxury, but I think that we've also, anyone who's in this business has done that, has had this thing where we still have the day job, we're working, so we're doing an entire career basically that we're getting paid for, but then we're doing an entire career in addition for free for many years. Like most of these shows we're getting paid little to nothing to
you're getting paid
do.
in drinks often.
Yeah, which is actually, if you're getting paid in drinks, it actually is hurting your productivity a little bit more even. No, I agree. I mean, so do you have a specific like plan of action that you feel like could repair your relationship with the Democratic Party?
I'll be honest, literally one thing was said by Josh Shapiro when he was on The Daily Show.
Okay.
That made me go, why don't they all do that?
Okay.
He said he eliminated the college degree requirement for 90% of government jobs. And I remember when a lot of my friends were going into the fire department when I was much younger, and they were all having to like scramble and like go to university, pay for University of Phoenix just to get like a certain amount of credits.
You needed a college degree to be a firefighter?
No, but you needed like 60 credits. It was some bizarre amount of money. And then
that's so wasteful. Like if you know you're going to be a firefighter, why would you even go?
It's all on the job training.
Yeah.
Like, so it's like, yeah, you take that test at 17 so you can get that job at 19, 20.
Right.
It's like, why are you, and there's guys who went and got full degrees and then went, and it will maybe help you advance, but there's not a lot of jobs to advance. You become a chief eventually. You know what I mean?
Sure.
Like, but like, it's like, why are we requiring these people to spend this money, whether they're taking out a loan or even if they're getting a Pell Grant and it's just tax money, and they're going to community college, whatever it is.
They don't want to be there. They know what they want to do. It's not like they're going. Like I actually went to an art school because I knew what I wanted to be. I knew I wanted to be an artist, which I feel like is like actually more helpful. Like if there was firefighter college, like if you know you want to be a firefighter, what are we doing? Why are we wasting everyone's time?
There are fire science.
Yeah, well,
majors
I'm saying like that's the kind of like the only thing that would maybe be helpful, but it's basically a manual job.
Yeah, and it's all on the job training. You can't like learn that.
Right.
Like, I mean, you talk to some of those guys and they're like, here's what you do is you cut a hole in the roof and then you knock out the windows and then the fire goes up. And then I'm like, I wouldn't have known that. Like, I mean, I know the idea that heat goes up.
Right.
But I never would be like, oh, right, you're supposed to fucking sit there with an axe and chop holes in the ceiling.
Yeah.
I never would have fucking thought. You know what I mean? Like, it's like you learn that because some old guy goes, what are you, fucking stupid?
Yeah.
And you go, yeah, I am stupid.
You don't need to sit in a class and discuss the theory of like fire.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you don't need to know that much about thermodynamics to spray water on a thing and like cut like, you know what I mean? Some guy is going to be like, just do this. This is how this works.
Yeah.
You don't need to know why.
Yeah, so this better than everyone else mentality kind of has gone into even how people get jobs in this country, meaning like requiring a college degree for so many positions that don't require. But what is the benefit to the Democratic Party to require people to have college education for jobs that
I think just showing that you want to free people from the sense of indentured servitude and debt would go a long way. And you're not going to see, first of all, Ronald Reagan created government-backed student loans, which led to, that's why we spend so much money on college. Other countries don't have like dorming and all this stuff. It's because because you're 18, and as we all know with any of our friends who had a credit card, even if you didn't go to college, you should not trust an 18-year-old with credit. So there's all these guys, they go and they get loans and they go to school and they, do drugs and fuck and they get a degree that really isn't that helpful. You know what I mean? And like, they're in debt for 25 fucking years. And it's just getting away from that is going to help. Because how many people that have bachelor's degrees are middle class? And then there's a bunch of studies that came out in England and the U.S. recently. The Economist just put a piece out on it that master's degrees are almost useless. They're
Yeah.
almost like worthless. In
Yeah.
some cases, they actually, people with master's degrees, because they spend 2 years less in the field, are earning less over a career
Oh, interesting.
in certain fields than people who just went with a bachelor's degree right into the field, especially if you account how much interest they paid on the master's degree.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, we need to like kind of move away from this idea that if you do this, you're good. If you do this, you're bad, which we were all taught. And look, I got to get out of here in a second, but like,
Right.
this is a really out there idea. There's a video I put out, but I kind of believe that Ronald Reagan kind of did that on purpose and created a national drinking age to create all these customers for banks. Like,
Yeah, I'm trying to think like why requiring a college degree for so many of these positions, like how that helps the government. It does seem like the way it would help the government is by having all this money be funneled into private financial institutions.
what's also, there's that, and then also you're in debt. You're significantly less likely to quit a job if you're negative.
Right, because you can't.
And then now 15 years have passed. You don't know how to do anything else. You're too young to restart it.
You only know how to do the thing that you originally started doing. Oh God, and I mean, I think many comedians think that. We go, what could I do if I didn't do this? There's a couple things I could do, but none really that useful. Well, thank you so much for talking with us today. Plug your special one more time.
Burn After Saying. It's on the High Society Radio YouTube channel, which you can also find that interview I did with Martin Rook there if you're curious about that.
Yeah.
And then you can follow me at Chris from BKLYN on Twitter and Instagram, and I post all that stuff there. But Burn After Saying is the name of the special.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Chris.
No problem. Thanks for having me, Corinne.
Of course. We're going to move full steam ahead to our girls section. I saw this article, and then thanks to WACO Alyssa for also reminding me to make sure that I went over this week. This is from Yahoo News, who I think also got it in part from CNN. Georgia dismissed all members of Maternal Mortality Committee after ProPublica obtained internal details of 2 deaths. Okay. Georgia officials have dismissed all members of a state committee charged with investigating deaths of pregnant women. The move came in response to ProPublica having obtained internal reports detailing 2 deaths. ProPublica reported in September on the deaths of Amber Thurman and Candy Miller, which the state Maternal Mortality Review Committee had determined were preventable. They were the first reported cases of women who died without access to care restricted by a state abortion ban, and they unleashed a torrent of outrage over the fatal consequences of such laws. The women's stories became a central discussion in the presidential campaign and ballot initiatives involving abortion access in 10 states. Confidential information provided to the Maternal Mortality Review Committee was inappropriately shared with outside individuals, Dr. Kathleen Toomey, Commissioner of the State Department of Public Health, wrote in a letter dated November 8th and addressed to members of the committee. Even though this disclosure was investigated, the investigation was unable to uncover which individuals disclosed confidential information. Therefore, effective immediately, the current MMRC is disbanded and all member seats will be filled through a new application process. A health department spokesperson declined to comment on the decision to dismiss the committee, saying that the letter, which the department provided to ProPublica, speaks for itself. Georgia Governor Brian Kemp's office also declined to comment, referring questions to the health department. Under Georgia law, the work of the Maternal Mortality Review Committee is confidential, and members must sign confidentiality agreements. Those members see only summaries of medical records stripped of personal details, and their findings on individual cases are not supposed to be shared with the public, not even with hospitals or with family members of women who died. The health department's letter states that there could be new steps to keep the board's deliberations from public view. The letter said officials might change other procedures for onboarding committee members, better ensuring confidentiality, committee oversight, and MMRC organizational structure. Maternal mortality review committees exist in every state. They are tasked with examining deaths of women during a pregnancy or up to a year after and determining whether they could have been prevented. And we've talked about that ages ago on this show. Georgia's had 32 standing members from a variety of backgrounds, including OBGYNs, cardiologists, mental health care providers, a medical examiner, health policy experts, and community advocates. They are volunteer positions that pay a small honorarium. Their job is to collect data and make recommendations aimed at combating systemic issues that could help reduce deaths and publish them in reports. The Georgia Committee's most recent report found that of 113 pregnancy-related deaths from 2018 through 2020, 101 had at least some chance of being prevented. Its recommendations have led to changes in hospital care to improve the response to emergencies during labor and delivery, and to new programs to increase access to psychiatric treatment. The health department's letter states that the change to the current committee will not result in a delay in the MMRC's responsibilities, but at least one of their other state has experienced a lag as a result of reshaping its committee. Idaho let its Maternal Mortality Review Committee legislation expire in July 2023, effectively disbanding the committee after lobbyist groups attacked members for recommending that the state expand Medicaid for postpartum women, which is certainly something that people need. I mean, women in America just have absolutely no support postpartum. And now that we're going to be sitting under a Republican president, the party that values family so much and can't stop speaking to how much we need women to continue pumping out babies, and is just crying themselves to sleep every night for the fact that we're having less babies. Maybe they should stop taking care away to women postpartum. Okay, as not just health, bodily health care, but fucking mental health care. Earlier this year, Idaho's legislature reestablished the committee, but new members weren't announced until November 15th. There is now more than a year-long delay in the review process. Reproductive rights advocates say Georgia's decision to dismiss and restructure its committee could also have a chilling effect on the committee's work, potentially dissuading its members from delving as deeply as they have into the circumstances of pregnant women's deaths if it could be politically sensitive. They did what they were supposed to do. This is why we need them, said Monica Simpson, executive director of Sister Song, one of the groups challenging Georgia's abortion ban in court. To have this abrupt disbandment, my concern is, what are we going to lose in the process in terms of time and data? One objective of any maternal mortality review committee is to look at the circumstances of a death holistically to identify root causes that may be able to help other women in the future. In the case of Candy Miller, the most prominent detail in a state medical examiner's report of her death was that she had a lethal combination of painkillers in her system, including fentanyl. It attributed the cause of death to drug intoxication. And just for those of you who aren't familiar with what happens when you're dealing with babies and giving birth or even like egg freezing, it is not uncommon for them to give you fentanyl. Okay, so that's just like, if you're like, why was there fentanyl? It's not uncommon at all to get fentanyl at the hospital. But the Georgia committee looked at the facts of the death with a different objective, to consider the broader context. A summary of Miller's case prepared for the committee, drawn from hospital records and the medical examiner's report, included that Miller had multiple health conditions that can be exacerbated by pregnancy, that she had ordered abortion pills from overseas, and that she had unexpelled fetal tissue, which showed the abortion had not fully completed. It also stated that her family had told the coroner she didn't visit a doctor due to the current legislation on pregnancies and abortions. What a damn fucking shame. The committee found her death was preventable and blamed the state's abortion ban. The fact that she felt that she had to make these decisions, that she didn't have adequate choices here in Georgia, we felt that definitely influenced her case, one committee member told ProPublica in September. She's absolutely responding to this legislation. For Miller's family, the committee's findings were painful but wanted. It seems like that is essential information that you would share with the family, said Miller's sister, Taria Tomlin Randall, who was not aware of the committee's work until ProPublica ProPublica contacted her. She also said it's upsetting to hear that the committee's members were dismissed partly as a result of her sister's case being disclosed to the public. I don't understand how this is even possible, she said. The committee also investigated the case of Amber Thurman, who died just 1 month after Georgia's 6-week abortion law went into effect. The medical examiner's report stated that Thurman died of sepsis and retained products of conception, and that she had received a dilation and curettage, or DNC, and a hysterectomy after an at-home abortion. And I do want to point out that these are also both Black women, and that's important because of multiple reasons. Number one, the maternal mortality rate for Black women is much higher than it is for white women, although across the board, no matter what your skin color is, the maternal mortality rate in America is extremely high for a first world nation. But additionally, as with anything, it is often people of color who are going to suffer first when committees are disbanded and things are taken away, because these are people who were already being treated as less than, and these committee boards and stuff are usually created to protect people who are being treated the lowest, because people who are being treated the highest already, well, they have other protections. Usually money is the protection. Let's see. So the hospital had delayed providing a DNC. When the committee members received a summary of her hospital stay, they saw a timeline with additional factors. The hospital had delayed providing a DNC, a routine procedure to clear fetal tissue from the uterus, for 20 hours, which Thurman needed for rare complications she developed after taking abortion medication. The state had recently attached criminal penalties to performing a DNC, with few exceptions. The summary showed doctors discussed providing the DNC twice, but by the time they performed this procedure, it was too late. Committee members found that there was a good chance Thurman's death could have been prevented if she had received the DNC sooner. Doctors and a nurse involved in Thurman's care did not answer questions from ProPublica for its September story. The hospital also did not respond to multiple requests for comment. And keep in mind, hospitals are sued up the wazoo. Because basically, anytime someone dies and it was kind of unexpected, a lot of times families do attempt to sue. And there is this area of it's not like a robot is making the decision. It is doctors and nurses who are making decisions in a pinch about what to do. And sometimes the family will disagree with the actions taken, and it is their right to then sue. But this case goes beyond that, right? It goes beyond that because there's actual repercussions from legislation that the hospital feared, not just repercussions from the family. Some experts say that keeping the reports of maternal mortality review committees confidential is important for a committee to serve its purpose. They are set up not to assign blame, but instead to create a space for clinicians to investigate broad causes of maternal health failures. But others say the lack of transparency can serve to obscure the biggest disruption of maternal health care in half a century. We know that the reports that have come out of the committee are anonymized and synthesized in order to provide a 50,000-foot view, said Kwajalyn Jackson, executive director of Feminist Women's Health Center in Atlanta, which provides abortion care. But my worry is that in an effort to protect the state, there will be less information that will be available to people who could shift their actions, shift their protocols, shift their strategies, shift their behaviors in order to make a difference in maternal health outcomes. 2 states did make shifts to their committees. Idaho, after members made a recommendation to expand Medicaid that Republicans opposed, and Texas, after a member publicly criticized the state. In 2022, Texas committee members Nikina Wilson, a community advocate, spoke out against the state's decision to delay the release of its report during an election year. The following year, the legislature passed a law that created a second community advocate position on the committee. redefined the position and had Wilson reapply. She was not reappointed. The state instead filled one of the slots with a prominent anti-abortion activist. Wilson said Georgia's decision to dismiss its committee could cause greater harm. What message is being said to the families who lost their loved ones? She said, there's going to be even less accountability for this not to happen again. So, absolutely wild shit going down. Another thing I wanted to talk about was Hunter Biden, right? So, I follow this interesting attorney on Instagram who I do hope to have on the show one day. Eliza Orleans. She is a New York City public defender. And she just talks about a lot of interesting things. I actually have a mutual friend, so that's why I initially started following her. But my friend was like, well, I think I have this friend, Eliza, and I think you would really like her. And she did a reel the other day that was like, I think this might be an unpopular opinion, but I believe that Joe Biden should pardon Hunter Biden before he leaves office. And it's something that he is, can do. The reasons that he wouldn't would be because obviously people, especially on the right, would flip, and it could, tarnish his legacy or his reputation, whatever. Reputation I wouldn't be so worried about. Legacy, I suppose everyone's worried about that. We are humans. We are not detached from ego. But he does have the power to do that. And I mean, the reason that he would is, number one, because it's fucking family, and Eliza pointed this out. And I don't know if you guys are aware, but, Joe Biden has, lost his first wife, his baby daughter in an accident. And then his other son died of cancer. And so there's just a lot going on. He's had a lot of loss. And so even if, Hunter Biden perhaps isn't the perfect son, he doesn't have that much family, and you got to do what you can for your family. So that was one of her arguments. And then additionally, it's like, well, if he doesn't pardon Hunter Biden, then he will kind of be at the helm of, Donald Trump. He'll and I feel like Donald Trump is going to take a lot of shit out on Hunter Biden. Like, the Republicans are obsessed with Hunter Biden, and then specifically like Donald Trump, I mean, this could be putting his son in a really dangerous position. That was the arguments that she was making. But Politico also did a piece on it. It said Joe Biden's final decision will be his toughest and most personal should the president pardon his son. Thanks to President Joe Biden's Justice Department, Donald Trump is headed to the White House, and his son Hunter might be headed to prison. And believe it or not, the drama will intensify shortly. In a matter of weeks, the younger Biden is set to be sentenced in 2 different criminal courts. On December 12th, he will appear in federal court in Delaware, where he was convicted over the summer of buying a gun in 2018 while addicted to drugs. Several days later, he is set to appear before a federal judge in Los Angeles for sentencing on tax fraud charges, which he pleaded guilty to in September, just as a trial was about to get underway. There has been speculation in Washington for months about whether Biden will pardon his son. The question raises a host of considerations: legal, political, practical, and historic, and I would say also ethical, that cannot be easily disentangled or reconciled. But in the end, should he do it? Particularly in the wake of Trump's victory, Biden is on strong ground, at a minimum, to commute any sentence of imprisonment for his son Hunter before he leaves office. Not a pardon exactly, but an important show of mercy. A commutation would not wipe the slate clean like a pardon. It would not suggest Hunter Biden was innocent or deserved forgiveness for his crimes, but it would spare him potentially years behind bars and avoid further pain for the Biden family. It's true that this would amount to a reversal for the president. Biden said repeatedly while he was still running for re-election that he would not pardon his son or commute any sentence, a stance the White House reiterated days after Trump's win. But Biden may have good reason to change his mind, not least of all because he was effectively ousted as the Democratic Party's 2024 presidential nominee and now must watch as Trump, who lies more prolifically and corrupted the pardon process more egregiously than any president in modern American history, will return to the White House. And I don't necessarily think that we should be making that he should make the decision because it's like, well, they do bad stuff, so I should do bad, or they do unethical things, so I should do unethical things. I think it's more just like, at the end of the day, it's like, this is your fucking son. Like they said, it's not a full pardon. It doesn't wipe the slate clean. They're commuting. It would be a commuting of the sentence. And just like, who the fuck cares? You're old. You're going to die soon. Like, are you more worried about what people are going to say about you? Or are you more worried about what your son's life is going to be like for the next several years? But Biden might have good reason to change his mind. Like I said, okay, let's start with a basic but important proposition. The cases against Hunter Biden probably would not have been brought against anyone else. So it's because of the position. It's like you have to take account for like, oh, so many eyes were on Hunter Biden because he is my son, because I am the president, because I am Joe Biden, and so I can give him some relief. This is not any excuse. This is not to excuse any of Hunter Biden's conduct, but the gun charges have almost no real precedent, and the conduct underlying the tax charges is usually resolved by the Justice Department through repayment and or fines. The reason we are here is because Trump and his Republican allies effectively and successfully pressured Joe Biden's own Justice Department to prosecute his son. In fact, there was a deal in place last summer under which Hunter Biden would have pleaded guilty to 2 misdemeanor tax charges and entered a pretrial diversion program to resolve the gun case. Congressional Republicans balked, claiming that this was some sort of sweetheart deal, and the presiding judge in Delaware, a Trump appointee, effectively scuttled the agreement. Delaware U.S. Attorney David Weiss, a registered Republican, first appointed by Trump, then decided to pursue a broader and more aggressive set of charges against Biden without a plea deal. Attorney General Merrick Garland then designated him as a special counsel, which gave Weiss now new powers and allowed him to charge the case in Los Angeles outside of his home jurisdiction, which he would otherwise have been unable to do. It is not clear whether Weiss will seek terms of imprisonment in either or both cases, and it is far from clear what the presiding judges will ultimately do when the sentencing dates arrive in a few weeks. Under the relevant sentencing guidelines, Hunter Biden appears to face a year or more in prison in the gun case and 2 to 3 years in the tax case. Those guidelines are not binding, but every federal sentencing judge is required to calculate and take them into account. Recent data indicates that about 40% of federal sentences end up within the guidelines range, but judges can take a wide array of considerations into account to deviate from the guidelines and sentence under the range that is otherwise recommended. It is possible that in Delaware, where Hunter Biden was convicted on the gun charge, the judge could sentence him to probation and or a fine, particularly given the highly unusual nature of the charges. In that case, the president would not need to issue a pardon or commutation to save his son from prison time, and he could let the conviction stand. Things are riskier for Hunter Biden in the tax fraud case in Los Angeles. It is more likely in that case that the judge would impose a term of imprisonment given the nature of the conduct, the amount of money at issue. Prosecutors concluded that Biden had failed to pay $1.4 million in taxes, and the higher guidelines range as a result. But if Hunter Biden gets a term of imprisonment in one or both cases, his father would be well within his rights to commute the sentences. There would be no real precedent for Biden to weigh, but of course, there is no real precedent for any of this. The cases against Hunter Biden were ultimately the result of a Republican pressure campaign and Garland's decision to let Weiss pursue the cases as a special counsel. The Justice Department declined to comment for this column. Trump and his Republican allies would likely bristle at any intervention by Biden, but there is no reason to take their complaints seriously. After all, Trump abused the pardon power more than any president in our lifetimes in order to protect his political allies. He pardoned Paul Manafort and Roger Stone and Steve Bannon. He pardoned a prominent Republican fundraiser and donors, as well as a bunch of former Republican members of Congress. He pardoned war criminals and he pardoned family, his son-in-law, Jared Kushner's father. As Trump left office with this pardon spree, there was intense criticism in the media and among Trump's political opponents, but Republicans largely fell in line. It is hard to see how anyone who kept quiet during that period could credibly complain if Biden commutes a prison term for his son, which is not to say that it would not happen anyway. As for Biden himself, he would have at least two political and practical considerations to weigh. The first is the question of what this would do for his legacy and for the political standing of the Democratic Party. But Biden may not care much about either. Of course, they fucking turned on him and you're going to die soon. So who the fuck cares for either of these? It doesn't matter what people, first of all, it doesn't matter what people think of you when you're alive, but it certainly doesn't matter what people think of you when you're dead. For one thing, his political legacy, at least at the moment, is already in tatters with Trump's ascent, and this is his son. As for political fallout for his fellow Democrats, Biden is probably not in a particularly charitable mood these days, given his ousting as the party's 2024 nominee and the post-election recriminations that lay Vice President Kamala Harris's loss at his feet. The second and perhaps trickier question is whether a commutation or a pardon on the charges would lead the incoming Trump Justice Department to pursue Hunter Biden on additional charges of some sort. It is not immediately clear what those charges might be, though Republicans have long posited dubiously that he could be charged under the Foreign Agents Registration Act in connection with his overseas political consulting work. Trump, for his part, has previously raged at the entire Biden crime family amid his vows of vengeance toward his political enemies. The only way for Joe Biden to eliminate that risk would be for him to issue a blanket pardon for his son, for instance, on any potentially unlawful conduct he may have engaged in prior to the date of the pardon. But that would be legitimately novel and could spark a real political firestorm. In the end, this will be an intensely and deeply personal decision for the president. His family, like many Americans, has struggled through death, divorce, and substance abuse, and a prison term for Hunter Biden would compound the tragedies they've faced. I would also argue that, yes, like many American families, but I think he has, although his highs have been higher, certainly than the average American family, I would also argue his lows have been lower. He has a really tragic story. Under the circumstances, Biden could be forgiven for wanting to spend his remaining years quietly and to do so with his remaining son by his side, right? So that's that. I thought that was really interesting, and I hope that he pardons Hunter Biden. But I hope they spent a lot of time together, right? And then last, let's get to our main story. It was the fact that the charges were dropped against Trump. I'm sure you've heard about this. I'm going to actually take it. Sorry, this episode. There was a lot of things that went awry just because we had to record at a different time. So I'm just trying to make this as fluid as possible for everybody. But I'm actually going to take it from Fox News because it's a shorter article and we don't have a ton of time left. But this is Judge grants Jack Smith request to dismiss January 6 charges against Trump. Appeal dropped in Florida Doc's case. Trump says lawfare against him was a political hijacking, but says he persevered against all odds and won. A judge has dropped the charges against President-elect Donald Trump in the D.C. case against him following a request that special counsel Jack Smith made on Monday. The decision concerns the investigation into the January 6 U.S. Capitol breach. Fox News Digital previously learned of Smith's request earlier on Monday. The government has moved to dismiss the superseding indictment without prejudice, U.S. District Judge Tanya Chutkan wrote in a decision. Defendant does not oppose the motion and the court will grant it. Smith also filed a motion to drop his appeal in his classified records against Trump, a case that was tossed in July by federal Judge Aileen Cannon. Cannon ruled Smith was unlawfully appointed as special counsel. The moves come after Smith earlier this month, after Trump's victory in the 2024 presidential election, signaled he would begin winding down his case against Trump. The filing went live on the Department of Justice docket on Monday afternoon. Smith had already filed a motion to vacate all deadlines in the 2020 election interference case against Trump in Washington, D.C., a widely expected move, but one that stopped short of dropping the case against Trump completely. Smith had said his team planned to give an updated report on the official status of the case against Trump on December 2nd. Trump pleaded not guilty to all charges in the case and took the fight to the U.S. Supreme Court, arguing on the basis of presidential immunity. The High Court ruled that Trump was immune from prosecution for official presidential acts, forcing Smith to file a new indictment. Trump pleaded not guilty to those new charges, too. Trump's attorneys have been seeking to have the election interference charges dropped in Washington, D.C., alleging that Smith was appointed unlawfully. The American people reelected President Trump with an overwhelming mandate to make America great again. Today's decision by the DOJ ends the unconstitutional federal cases against President Trump, and it is a major victory for the rule of law. Trump spokesman and incoming White House Communications Director Stephen Chung said in a statement, "The American people and President Trump want an immediate end to the political weaponization of our justice system, and we look forward to uniting our country." Trump pleaded not guilty to all charges stemming from both of Smith's investigations. Smith is expected to resign as special counsel before Trump takes office. Trump posted to his Truth Social Monday afternoon that the cases against him are empty and lawless and should have never been brought. And then he goes on, but we don't fucking care what the rest of his says. So that is that, and it's very interesting to see that, especially after reading the Politico piece on whether or not President Biden will pardon Hunter Biden. But that is this week's episode. I hope you enjoyed it. Again, it was a little bit more of an unorthodox episode for many reasons. One, Mike was supposed to be here and he ended up not being here, but shout out to Jorge in the booth who used to work on the show, who came through in a pinch. Thanks to our guest, Chris FAGA. Definitely check out his special Burn After Saying on YouTube. Thanks to all my Patreon subscribers. If you want to subscribe yourself, just head over to patreon.com/withoutaCountry. And of course, thanks to everyone who listens to Without a Country or watches Without a Country every week. You know that the truth is in there. If you want to send me an email, it's withoutacountrypodcast@gmail.com. Please follow me on all social media at philanthropygal. Follow Without a Country podcast on Instagram. And make sure that you are subscribed to the YouTube for Without a Country, no matter how you intake the show. I appreciate you. Have a safe and happy Thanksgiving. And I'm excited to hear about all the fights that you're going to have with your relatives. But just remember to cite your sources and calmly present facts. And, I don't know. Try to think of positive experiences that you had as a child with these people who now have seemingly turned against you. I guess that's what I can say. Anyway, peace. Have a great night. Bye.